Alrighty, let's get this going. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 4th Annual Compass Alumni Reunion. My name is Wyndham, pronouns he, him, his, and I'm one of the co-executive directors of Compass. Compass is excited to be exploring important LGBTQ plus topics in collaboration with our guest panelists. This year has already been one long roller coaster ride, and we appreciate your participation in our online format for this reunion. Take it away, Nils.
Hey everyone, thank you again so much for joining us for Compass's 4th Annual Alumni Reunion. My name is Nils, pronouns he, him, his. I'm the other co-executive director of Compass. And just to talk through some logistics, we're gonna have the panel run for about an hour, followed by a 30-minute Q&A. And we highly encourage you all to ask any questions you have by entering them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And I'll enter that in the chat too, just for any late arrivals, just in case. But yeah, I'd like to ask our speakers and our moderator to introduce themselves, and we can go ahead and get things started.
Hi. Do you want me to start?
That sounds great.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nils, and thanks, Wyndham, and thanks to the Carlson School and the Compass group for getting this organized. I think it's really terrific. My name is Vicki Rayport, and I am a Carlson School graduate in finance and accounting from a long time ago, 1986. In fact, it was probably just when the Carlson School was launched, very well, right around that time. I am currently an independent board director and a strategic advisor to a number of privately held and nonprofit organizations. I'm the former founder and CEO of a company called Quantum Retail Technology, which is a big data analytics firm that serves the large global retailers. I am married to my lovely wife, Guff, for 7 years, although we've been together for 29, and we live in Minneapolis, but right now I'm in Palm Springs, so.
Awesome. Well, I can go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Paler, and I am a 2018 graduate of the Carlson School and actual Compass alumni. So that's really exciting. It's exciting to be here with fellow Compass people. I currently work as a project manager on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team at US Bank. And I've been with the bank for about 2 years. I started there as an intern and then did a little bit of marketing, but quickly found my passion for DEI and have been doing that for the past year. And I currently live in Minneapolis, and yes, that's about it. Not much else, but excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
I can go next. Brent Opal. I am a University of Minnesota alumni, and I received my PhD from the institution. I spent several years leading Carlson School's equity and diversity efforts. Really enjoyed that work, but after several years of doing that, I decided to move into the classroom, and I took a faculty role with the University of Wisconsin at Eau Claire, and I teach strategic management. I think also important to share is when I was working on my dissertation and my current research stream as a tenure track faculty, I do a lot of research in not only diversity and inclusion as part of corporate social responsibility, but I also focus in on LGBTQA issues in the workplace. And I'm happy to be here.
Very cool. Well, everyone, my name is Maeve. I am moderating this panel today. I'm very excited to be doing so. I'm currently a senior at the Carlson School of Management, and I'm studying marketing. Aside from that, I'm just trying a little bit of everything. I own my own photography business. I guess that's another thing that I do. But I'm very passionate and interested in what it means to be a queer individual in the workplace, in life in general, throughout time as an undergrad, what it means in that light. But I'm very excited again to be talking with all of you today. And I'd like to just get right into it. The first thing I wanted to talk about to kind of go right back into basics is talking about your experience in business school and what you, or school in general, to be honest, and whether it is what you liked or what you could see being improved for future LGBTQ plus students. So I want to kick things off by just asking, how do you think your experience in business school compares to that of current students? And Ryan, maybe since you just recently graduated, you'd like to kick things off here?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. Yes, as you said, I'm only 2 years out of school, so it's not like I've been, in the workplace for a while now. But I will say that things have changed a considerable amount even in those 2 years, and I'd say that from a kind of a two perspective way. One thing I think about is for LGBT students who are coming into the business school, Compass already exists. It didn't when I was there, it's something we had to create for ourselves, but now it's something where the students can come in and they know that there's a space for them. And I just think about coming into that kind of empowering environment where you know that you are welcomed. That's got to be a really great starting point for students. And I'm so excited for that aspect. And then kind of on the flip side, how it's changed is now that there's Compass alumni out in the workforce. Me, why don't you think? But seriously, like we're out here. It was really incredible when I was promoting this event kind of in my network, and Nick Alm, who was one of the founders of Compass, said, "Can you believe that it's the 4th annual alumni reunion?" And I took a step back and I was like, wow. At first I thought that was a typo, but it's not. Like it's true. This is the 4th annual. And so you think about all the people who have graduated now, and you've got, once you leave school, you've got so many people out there who are Compass alumni who want to be there for you and interact with you. And I think that in itself is just a really great change, even in the 2 years that I graduated. So I'm really excited about that.
Thank you for that, Ryan. And I've noticed that too, with only it being the 4th alumni reunion and having there just such a intense culture change within Carlson, but in the Twin Cities in general. I think that's fantastic. Vicki, how about yourself?
Absolutely.
Well, back in the dark ages, first of all, I think it's just so impressive with the fact that Compass exists and that we're having these conversations and that it's an alumni reunion. And I mean, that's just so cool. Back when I was in school, I think it was there were very distinct communities. There was the gay community and there was campus community. And there really was not a tremendous amount of intersection between the two at a organized level. Obviously, as a gay student, you could find other gay students and form your own relationships or cohorts, but there was never really an organization that was validating of that. So there was kind of always an other. It was always, it really felt very separate. And even though University of Minnesota is a great school, that was a long time ago. And, for us, we found our community as gay people outside of college. And it really made it, just like everything else, there was not a lot of crossover. And so you didn't necessarily feel like you were bringing your whole self to everything that you did, both in the workforce and at school. And so, I just can't commend you guys enough that this is a huge change from when I went to school, and it's amazing and a very brave and a world that we live in now, and to be so accepting of everybody, and not just at college. I mean, we've got these kind of support groups that are happening in high schools and middle schools, and I mean, that's amazing, right? So that to be able to grow up in that environment is incredible.
Thank you for that. Brent, what about you?
So my experience was very similar to Vicky's, where most of the culture for lesbian and gay students was outside of the university. Especially that when I was in business school, there wasn't anything in the College of Business specifically for students like myself. So I really looked for that community outside of the college, outside of the university. and built the relationships that I had that way. And as far as exploring myself, who I was as an individual, but also the community too. So it was similar.
Awesome. And while we're on the topic, and we can just go around in the same order if everyone would like to touch on this, things certainly have improved in 2020 as a queer person in both schools and workplaces and whatnot. Is there anything specific that any of you see that could be improved? Of course, there's a lot of things in general that could be, but anything in particular within maybe your experience that you're reflecting on or otherwise that could be improved in the school place or the workplace even?
Yeah, I definitely think, I mean, there's always room for improvement. And what I would see is the intersectionality between student groups. And this is something that we try to do, but it's challenging. It's a really challenging thing to create that culture change where you're not so siloed in your own respective identity, but where you can go out and be, real allies for other identities within Carlson and within the University of Minnesota. And it's something I've seen Compass doing really well at right now, cross-promoting a lot of different events. That's awesome. I'm not saying that everyone has to be a champion for every identity. That takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy, and just, it's the energy that not everyone has. But if you can ally to those champions who are out there doing it, that intersectionality is an amazing way to just really cross-promote and cross-allyship for so many different communities. And so I think just constantly working towards that intersectionality piece is really the way that we help everyone and really lift everyone up, and not just our own community. So that's something that I think that we can always do better on.
Yeah, I would echo what Ryan said. I really think it's that the idea that, we have to look beyond, one of the cool things about the LGBTQ plus community is that we are cut a broad swath across many different areas. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about intersectionality later on. And I think that's absolutely the continued progress we need to make.
Building upon both what Ryan and Vicky said, one piece that I would add is, I think an area that we can improve upon, in my workplace is a university, so kind of the college experience in a university as far as workplaces, the perspective that I'm coming from. And what I see is that there's a need for a lot more support of our LGBTQA students and helping them transition from maybe not being able to be who they are to helping them identify who they want to be and who they are as a person, as an individual, so that they can bring their whole selves to the classroom, I think is important. And I think, and this is probably, I'm sure it's true of the workplace as well, but colleges and universities need to do more in supporting students and helping them along that path.
Those are all really great points, and thank you for what you just said, Brent. I completely agree. In regards to having that extra support system, depending on where you are within your identity. I was lucky enough to be publicly out coming into college, but I have friends who did not have that. Instead, they had to begin this whole process of creating their identity as a professional, as a student, and as a queer individual. So I think that's very important. This seems like a great segue to get into that more intersectionality conversation. So activism in terms of the queer community and advocating for LGBTQ rights has changed a lot over time, and the ever increasing importance of intersectionality. So Vicky, if maybe you'd like to start us off here, what is the most personally impactful legal or political step that our country has taken to improve your specific life experience as a queer identifying person?
Yeah,
and then we'll go to Brent and then Ryan.
Yeah, great question. I think, just like all movements, every piece of progress rests on the shoulders of the people who came before it, right? So as I talk about my experience, there is so much that went into things before that we could spend all day on. But it's a long arc, even within my lifetime. I would really have to say that probably the most impactful is the fight for marriage equality. And Minnesota has really been at the forefront of changing putting a change to a very disturbing tide, where our country was codifying that same-sex marriage was not only legal but unconstitutional. It was happening at the state level, it was happening at the federal level, and it was really amazing that the movement in Minnesota was a coalition of many LGBTQ plus rights groups, from HRC to Project 515 to Minnesotans United for All Families. And that allowed us to be the first state to reject a state constitution to ban same-sex marriage in November of 2012. And within 6 months, actually go to having our legislature be the first legislature that enacted same-sex marriage. And really, you know, incredibly proud moments for me as a Minnesotan and as you know, a lesbian, and just, you know, for the whole movement. And you know, that happened in you know, allowed me to get married, you know, and I never thought I would, right? I mean, after 22 years of being with the same person, I was able to actually get married in the place that I live and have it be legal. And that campaign was really exceptional, I think. It was about changing the hearts and minds of the majority of Minnesotans by storytelling and by the philosophy that you have to humanize people, you have to make people human, and that if people know you and they love you, they will support you. And at a minimum, they probably won't hate you. And so, you know, after that, you know, shortly after that, US v. Windsor, they struck down DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act. And then shortly after that, you had, I can't say it, Obergefell versus Hodges, which made sure that if you were married in one state, it was recognized in another. Those were huge. They were really, really big things, and they affected our legitimacy in the eyes of our community, public, family, the legal system. And so that'd probably be number one for me.
Number one for me is also marriage equality. And I almost felt like because I was a Minnesota resident and lived in Minnesota for 15 years, and I was an engaged volunteer making telephone calls to help pass marriage equality. We held sessions at our home to talk to neighbors about the issues. And so when that vote went up in Minnesota, that was a huge deal. And I remember going down to celebrate it at the state capitol when it was announced, and we were all out on the grounds to do that. And in fact, in my office at Eau Claire, I have a picture of my husband and I on the mall at the state capitol the day it was announced. And so to me, that was one of the biggest things. And I remember some of the most rewarding moments are having some very personal conversations with friends or people that I knew who were on the fence as far as how they were going to vote with that, and thinking about advocacy and speaking to them. I think with sharing those personal stories, like Vicki said, really helped change the tide. And I'm really proud of what Minnesota did, and that we were early ones. So that was the big one for me.
You know, I love this event because those stories are so impactful. And I think something that a lot of us young LGBT individuals sometimes forget, and we take it for granted. And so when I think about what, you know, this question poses, there's not really anything. As a young, white, cis, gay man, I don't really have any legal battles that I think about. And it's because of people like Vicki and Brent who have really done the work for us, and you know, really paid it forward for us to make sure that we don't have to fight those battles. And so first, thank you. But I think about it, and it's our time, and especially people like me who have so much privilege to kind of pick up that baton and keep running with it and fight for those people who have kind of fallen off the outskirts of the battle, like Black and Hispanic trans women who have, you know, really been disenfranchised by the movement. And so it's not really a personal battle, like legal battle for me, but it's picking up that baton and continuously fighting for the people in our community who haven't gotten it yet, who just haven't reached the level that we all need to be fighting for them to reach. So I would say, yeah, it's really great to remember all of those stories, but think about how we can improve upon all of that work that's already been done.
Absolutely. And thank you for wrapping up that question in that way. I think it's also very important to note the amount of white privilege in queer communities as well, and how, I mean, we're all white queer identifying people in this panel at the moment, and there are things to work towards in terms of this so-called intersectionality in a given workplace, and what DEI even means as a whole to that regard. And so then this is a great follow through into the next question. What does intersectionality mean to you specifically, and how have you seen it progress from the past up until now? And Vicki, if you'd like to start us off again.
Yeah, I mean, this all bleeds so together, right? So, in terms of just being able, just the use of the word intersectionality at this point in time is amazing, right? I mean, I don't even know that I heard that word 2 years ago. And, it is really come front and center since the George Floyd murder. And I think it's absolutely critical. And it's a recognition that, people are multifaceted, right? We have many identities, and that they're interconnected, and that there is that interconnectedness there are parts of that where there is just systemic discrimination and marginalization. And so, there are social categories of race and class and gender identity. And it's this recognition that we bring many selves to the world, and it goes, I think so much of it is tied up with race right now. It is that, I could say I am a woman, I am a lesbian. Those are marginalized communities. I've had to deal with a lot of things as being self-identified as part of those groups, but it's all been made so much easier because I'm white, right? And so the LGBT movement is, as we said, really cuts across everything. And the amazing thing is that we are so well positioned to continue our work and bring along with us, whether it's the transgender community that still has, persistent discrimination at a really high level, Black, Indigenous, people of color. It's really our duty and our great honor and responsibility to help bring them forward with us. So that's kind of what it means to me.
Yeah, I do agree. I think that especially in today's context, that I have to realize that I'm a white gay male, and when I'm in groups of people who don't know me, I probably present myself as just a white male. And I shouldn't say just, but that when thinking about intersectionality, I recognize that privilege gives me an opportunity to share my voice to help advocate for others. And race crosses that in ways that I still need to learn a lot more about because I come from that kind of place of privilege.
Yeah, I would definitely have to echo all of that. I think it's so important to note. And I think, when I came out, I was like, yes, I've won the diversity award. And it wasn't until I heard that word intersectionality that I realized, I was like, whoa, I have so much privilege. Like, in realizing that, like, everyone has different amounts of privilege, and we really have to understand that. And so what I realize now is that my role, and it's different for everyone, but is really talking to those people those cis white people in my community that I'm so connected to, family, friends, the makeup of the demographics of the places I live, and just helping them kind of bridge the gap. I see myself as kind of that bridge to different identities that I can help help them better understand so they can get there a little bit quicker. And then it's not so much work for those really underprivileged people who just are exhausted. And I feel like I have to do so much more of that emotional labor because I have the privilege to do it. And so it's fighting that intersectionality fight in that regard and just educating those around me who just aren't exposed to it.
Absolutely. Thank you all for what you just said to answer those questions. I think that's all extremely important. This, I suppose, relates, but I'd like to bring up a couple of recent political events that have been very well talked about that I think is extremely relevant for this particular conversation. For one thing, the historic Bostock versus Clayton County Supreme Court case from this past summer was undoubtedly a huge victory for queer individuals in the US, but was this the final legal step we needed? Or is there still more to be done? And if so, why? Brent, would you like to start this one off?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I do want to root this in some context. So before the Obergefell case this summer that the Supreme Court ruled on, an important aspect to understand is I think there were two things that were happening. One, I think a lot of people felt that sexual orientation and gender identity was already protected. In many of my conversations with people who are not actively engaged with the LGBTQA community, they were surprised to know that orientation and gender identity wasn't protected in either the Civil Rights Act or Title VII or other major pieces of legislation. And so I think that a lot of people from a point of privilege had assumed that that was already protected under law, and it wasn't. And so I think just the conversation around this case in particular elevated the understanding of some of the, especially HR law and employment law obstacles that we still needed to work through is important. And then the other piece of context that I think is important to recognize is that without that ruling, only sexual orientation and gender identity was only protected in 21 states. So there was majority of the country, you could be fired for being gay or lesbian, right? Which was a surprise again to a lot of people. And so certainly this specific case has huge implications for we as queer individuals, but also for employers. And I think that there's still certainly work to be done. But once a major ruling like this occurs, then there's a lot of sorting through the details of how to implement that within organizations. That still needs to happen. And that's the point we're at now, because there's some very large organizations, especially those that are global or international, that have to follow a variety of different international law, or a variety of different laws, depending upon which country they're operating in, that are going to have challenges figuring this out. And I think that we have an opportunity here as queer individuals to help that conversation and help others understand both the context of why this ruling is important, but also the implications for us.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I would come at it from kind of two different sides. One, absolutely not. We're not done. We're so not done. One thing I really think about is that, just because somebody ruled on something, it doesn't mean that you've changed the hearts and minds of everybody out there. It's not, a complete, just transformation. And so what we have to do is really take that ruling and make sense of it, and then help others actually put it into action. Because, there's a lot of ways to get around rulings and things like that. And, discriminate in nonchalant ways. And that's where we really got to fight. And that's where it's going to take a lot of time to really make those changes have, really stick. And then the other aspect I would say is that we can't just look at this from, just LGBTQIA plus laws and rulings. Is we it really has to come back to that intersectionality portion where rulings for, police brutality, things like that, those are just as much LGBT issues as they are for any other community, because those people are in our community. And so we have to continuously think that we've got to fight the same way we do for our own cases that we do for those different legal battles. So yeah, I would say that no, we're not done. No.
Yeah. I building upon what Brent and Ryan said, this was absolutely, it was historic and it should be celebrated, right? So don't take away the win. But I'm sure that those people who identify as transgender or queer understand that this is far from addressing the long-term concerns that they face. They have issues, still have issues associated with certain jobs, i.e. the military, right? You have issues with inclusion in sports, and you still can't use the bathroom that you want for the gender that you identify in every state. So, I mean, there's a long way to go at many, many different levels. I was listening to a seminar by a group called Race Forward, who've been working for decades to address and educate around systemic racism and systemic social justice issues. And they identified 3 pillars that really have to change in order for real systemic change to happen. And there's 3 areas of focus. One is policy, right? The other, which is kind of a ruling, right, or a law. The other is narrative and culture, which is really what Ryan talked about. Have you actually changed the way people talk and the way people behave when no one's looking, right? And then you have the institutions. And I really feel like we tend to focus on what we think are institutions and policies, and we forget the narrative, which is, but I also think the institutions are the most intractable. I mean, they are the things that say that, that come directly against what we're trying to do. And we'll talk about it in a second, but, I think the institutions are far, far from changing around this issue and other social justice issues. And it's really the reason why we have so many issues we're trying to attack simultaneously, is that we actually have to fight like a 3-front war on it.
Absolutely. I like how you mentioned the 3 pillars, and that may be a nice thing to incorporate into the next question. You may have been able to predict, but I would like to just bring up the implications potentially that you think Amy Coney Barrett's recent appointment to the Supreme Court is going to have for minority groups across the United States, whether that is on that first pillar policy level or institution level for the third, or just in general for how the narrative and culture may potentially change. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. We could do the same order.
Yep. Well, I do think it's important to understand that when both marriage equality and the recent Obergefell case was ruled upon, we don't have the same balance in the court that we did before. So only 3 of the 5 who ruled in favor of both of those are still on the court. So there's been changes with more than just one position. So although Barrett is the most recent, and certainly a shift in the dynamics of the court itself, I did want to point that out, that only 3 of the 5 are still, who voted in favor of both of those, are still serving on the court. And I do think that it's important because it speaks to the, I think it speaks to the importance of us continuing to be actively engaged and advocates for this cause, because in that narrative, if we think that we're done, which we're not, I think we all agree that we're not done. If we rest on the fact that we've made some accomplishments and we give up on being actively engaged in moving these issues forward, that gives opportunity for people in positions like this to chip away more so at the rights that we've been granted. And I think that from a perspective that two of the justices, both Thomas and Alito, have said that they are willing to revisit previous court decisions. That should give us all some pause and some concern, if not outright some fear about that kind of unknown. And the addition of another conservative to the court, who may or may not support that, we'll see, is something that we need to pay attention to. And I think the best way that we address that is by continuing to be actively engaged and move these discussions, the narrative, help push policy, help organizations figure this out as far as how best to provide all of us a place that we can live and work where we can bring our whole selves there.
Thanks, Brent. You're spot on. The word that I use is vigilance. I mean, and right now I am way more worried about Alito than I am about the newest justice. You know, he is being very bold in talking about how our rights to same-sex marriage and things like that are infringing on other potential constitutional rights of people, i.e. the religious freedom and religious liberty. I think I want to point out that our rights do not sit only in the Supreme Court, and that people who lead conservative movements against what we are working so hard to progress are really interested in turning back the clock, but they go deep. They go into way more than just the Supreme Court. They are making sure that state legislatures are predominantly conservative. They're looking for conservative governors. They're looking to make sure that at the state and federal level that conservative judges are being appointed. They play the long game. It's something that progressive movements have not been all that great about. And it's scary. You look at Roe v. Wade, which has been the law of the land for almost 50 years, and there has been a methodical and persistent focus on overturning it and eliminating a woman's right to choose. We go from our narrative of marriage equality to being the opposite of religious liberty or religious freedom. Are you against freedom? You know, I mean, these are really, really important things, and they are smack dab on the headlines right now. And so, you know, we have a lot to keep our eye on. Vigilance is the key. And I in no way feel comfortable that because I'm married today, I will be married tomorrow, or that my marriage will be recognized tomorrow. And so we just got to stay on it.
Yeah, I think those are really great perspectives. And I mean, after the day she was appointed, I gave myself, you know, time to freak out because that's kind of who I am. But, you know, I've got a great therapist who said, you know, worry about what you can control. And I really hold on to that because, you know, I'm not some great legal mind. It's not going to happen. And we've got some amazing queer lawyers out there who are going to do all they can to, you know, combat everything that's pushed out. But what I can control is talking to people and educating people about why our rights matter, why, you know, even talking about religious freedom in a way that puts down LGBT individuals and contributing to this the suicide rates of LGBT youth and how that's harmful and how their narrative is harmful. And those are things that I can control because it's using my voice to just help others better understand our community. And so, you know, they can put out any large sweeping policy that they want, but if every one of us, you know, chips away at that hate in our own communities, at some point, those don't matter. Those policy changes don't matter because we've done enough where people want to do the right thing. And it might sound, you know, like it's a little bit too optimistic, but that's what I'm going to hold on to. And you're right, Vicki, we're going to be vigilant. And so I'm going to be vigilantly optimistic about people doing the right thing.
Thank you. Also, that's a great thing to just hold on to in general, is focus on what you can control, as we are in this period of increasing activism surrounding the LGBTQ plus community. I think that's a great thing to hold on to. Let's switch gears. Excuse the honking if you could hear that. So let's switch gears a little bit onto the more so corporate / business organization side of things. I'm curious to hear all of your opinions on how companies have historically approached DEI efforts and what works well, perhaps, and even what needs to change. So Ryan, I'd like to start with you because this is kind of what you went right into post-grad. Throughout your career or the start of your career, how have you seen your company's DEI efforts perhaps evolve?
Yeah, so like I said, I've been, on our diversity, equity, and inclusion team for the past year. And in the past year, we've seen an unprecedented civil unrest in regards to the murder of George Floyd. We've seen an extremely contentious election and a global pandemic. It's been an easy year. But I will say this, is that especially from the US Bank perspective, because that's where I come from, is that we had a strategy long before this. We are focused on the numbers. We're focused on creating an inclusive environment. We're really focused on where we need to be to make sure change happens. But the biggest change that happened in this past year is the buy-in from people around us, specifically those who are in management and those who are in privileged positions. And that's been great. Our team was elevated to right under the CEO because of everything going on. And that's something that's a really great change. My worry is this buy-in will fade. And that is my biggest fear. And so while we've got people's ears, we've got people's, hearts at the moment, we've got to make sure that we are continuously hitting on this narrative that just because something happened and we're reactive to it, that's not where things should be. We should be working in more of a way that's, I say proactive progress is better than reactive change. And so because we reacted to this change that's happening over the past year, that's been so much change, it's great, it needs to be done, but let's use this buy-in to focus on what we can change proactively so that we don't need something like George Floyd to happen to wake us up. We've just fixed it beforehand. And so that's what I'm saying is this buy-in needs to stick, but I'm fearful that it won't. But yeah, that's been the biggest change in the past year for me.
Thanks, Ryan. Vicki, how about you?
Well, first of all, a huge change is obviously that there's even a DEI group in a corporate setting. I mean, that in and of itself is fantastic. And so, oh my goodness, yes, everything has changed since I started my career. One of the more positive things that I can tell Ryan is that I have experience working with a lot of different companies. I sit, at the corporate board level on many companies, and I'm part of other groups that are peer groups and of people who sit on both public and private boards. And I can tell you that DEI is, if not one of the hottest boardroom issues that there is. And that almost every company that I am involved with or speak to has some type of an initiative to diversify and to make more diverse and more inclusive, because the I is actually the really important part. The executive ranks, the leadership ranks, and the board ranks. And you have to, it's one thing to say, oh, we're just going to make jobs more available to different peoples of race or be more inclusive of LGBTQ plus people. But when you see them at the management level, at the top leadership levels of the organization and at the board level, then things can become you can start to change that institution, right? And so I'm very positive, right? I look and see, Tim Cook, the head of Apple, one of, if not the largest company in the world, openly gay man. And that is an inspiration to knowing that things really have changed quite a bit. And the board work tends to trail what you're hearing in the papers, because it really takes a long time for that, because it is changing the institution. And I can tell you that it is top of mind everywhere and people are acting on it. So that is a very good thing.
And thinking about what, and I'm going to root this in some of the research that I've done, and thinking about what companies have done and where they can improve upon. I think a lot of our mid to large size organizations have done a good job of providing employee resource groups focused on specific identities. So there's a women's resource group, then there may be a pride resource group, a Black resource group. So companies have done a pretty good job historically of providing that. But I think although that's a good first step, companies need to take that ERGs beyond simply being a networking, support, and social group. And they really need to engage those groups in the inclusion piece, building off of what Vicki said, and have them at the table when HR is talking about developing new policies and practices for the organization. They need to be engaged with the board when the board wants to do more about developing an inclusive work environment where everybody can feel comfortable and bring their whole selves to work. And I think that's where there's a great room for improvement, is taking the employee resource groups, engaging them in the conversation from a strategy level as far as how best to improve the organization is the next opportunity. And some companies are already doing that and they're doing that well. But I do think, and I know this from some of my research, that some companies have treated their employee resource groups as, oh, we've got a pride resource group, that's good enough. And they don't engage them in the conversation that impacts employees every day.
Thank you for that as well. With all these things being considered, what can we do both as individuals and as a community as a whole to shape the corporate environment or business environment into one that is LGBTQ plus friendly? We've touched on a lot of great actionable steps, I think, from each of your answers, but just as a collective and as an individual level, what are some good upcoming deliverables for the corporate community in terms of how we can make it more queer friendly?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's so much to do. One thing is, if your company has an employee resource group, make sure that people know, especially people who are not involved in the community, that they are welcome there so that they can learn. Your employee resource groups are putting out amazing educational materials. And if it's just going to queer people, we're just in this echo chamber. Get it out to them straight people who don't know what's going on. Like, that's what we can do, and that's what we need to be doing, because we've got to create our own allies at this point. So I think that's a big thing. And so it's educating others, and then educate yourself. Especially for us, young queer people, we need to remember what came before us, and understand our own history, because that's not something that's passed down generationally, unless it's like in, things like this that is specific to that, which I think is amazing. But we need to continuously do that. And it's on us to educate ourselves. So educate others and educate yourself.
Yeah, I would add to that, kind of just taking a step back. There's a real war for talent right now. I know that the unemployment numbers might not reflect that fact, but there is, right? You have an entire generation retiring over the next 20 years. And there are big vacuums that need to be filled. And it's the young people of today that are going to do that. And you get to make your choice about where you want to work, both in terms of the environment that you want to work in and the job that you want to do. And so you be intentional about that. Look at what the company's policies are, and don't just look at the policies, look at the people, right? You should be able to see out people when you're there. You should be able to see people of color when you are there, and Black people and Indigenous people. You should be able to see, does that company reflect the community and the clients that they're serving, right? And you make a choice. And if people want talent, they've got to create an environment where you're going to feel comfortable and where you want to work, right? I think the other thing is that people vote with their pocketbooks, and where you want to patronize, whether those companies and establishments that support our rights and are inclusive. So whether you're currently in a leadership position or not, we all lead by our actions, and we are responsible for making the environment that we work in both diverse and inclusive. And so be intentional about not only how you hire, but where you choose to go to work. So.
In thinking about both what Ryan and Vicky suggested, I also think there's some tools that we can use to help have these conversations from a variety of perspectives. So I'm sure many of you have heard of the Corporate Equality Index from the Human Rights Campaign. And although they don't rate every organization on its LGBTQA inclusiveness, there's certainly a long list that are rated. So we can vote that way by spending our money with those organizations. But from an employer-employee perspective, as somebody who's on the job market, you can help evaluate if, the inclusiveness of that company by what's the data that's been gathered by them in the Corporate Equality Index. But also, if you want to have a thought-provoking conversation with the senior leadership of your organization and bring them the Corporate Equality Index and say, hey, why are we getting a 90 out of 100? What can we do in our policies and practices to make this organization more inclusive? And the HRC provides you a lot of tools to make that happen and have those conversations and really be an advocate from an internal perspective within the organization for that. And a very easy way of saying it is, given the war on talent, if we want to be somebody who is recognized from top talent as being an employer of choice, we need to score 100 on this.
For sure. Thank you for all of those responses. I took a sneak peek at the Q&A, and I'm noticing that there are several questions waiting for me to ask you. So I'd love to jump right into those. Friendly reminder for anybody watching right now, if you still have questions, feel free to send them in the Q&A. I'll answer or ask them as I'm able to before we run out of time here. But I noticed this one, and I think this is a great follow-up question to what you all just responded. What do you see as the role of education, both K-12 and higher ed, in building a culture of acceptance and inclusion, specifically in the education space?
That's a great question because it starts there. That role of acceptance, that role of inclusivity, it starts at a young age. We grow up asking a random person to be our friend, and then we lose that because we're taught to lose it. And I think a lot about how we're talking about police brutality in this country and how there are bad apples, quote unquote. Those bad apples and those people are everywhere, in every industry, in every profession. And that's really scary because those people are teaching the youth of today. And if they're not teaching them inclusivity, what are they teaching them? And so I think about our education piece and the teachers that we have. My dad is, I'm a high school teacher. And, he didn't quite get transgender, as he called it, for a while. And it took me educating him and having years of conversations with him to really help him understand that these kids face incredible challenges that he doesn't quite understand. And recently, in the past 2 years, at the beginning of each day, or the start of the year, he asks what people's pronouns are and what their preferred name is now. And seeing, this 50-plus-year-old man ask those, white dude from Egan, ask those questions, I just think about, sitting in the audience of his classroom and not just for those queer kids or trans kids who are being asked that and feeling validated, but normalizing it for the kids who don't feel that way and helping them better understand that it's okay to ask those questions. It's respectful to ask those questions. That's where I think we need to start. We need to normalize these things so that everyone feels okay with them, not just the LGBTQ community.
That's awesome, Ryan. Thank you. Vicky, Brent, would you like to touch on that at all?
I can take the perspective of higher ed. I've spent a lot of time in higher ed, so I think one of the things one of the reasons why I like working in higher ed is oftentimes colleges and universities are on the leading edge of equity, diversity, and inclusion work, and that especially the more conservative industries are following or trailing that. That said, I think colleges and universities have a unique opportunity where we can help every student of ours explore their own identity, whatever that is, but then also give students the opportunity to, and the skill set to help others have that same, ask thought-provoking questions, give them critical thinking skills so that they can help others and, importantly, organizations be more inclusive and have thoughtful, respectful conversations that advance topics that are important to society as a whole. And I think higher education has an obligation to give students all students, that skill set.
I would just add one thing, which is, school curriculums are often set at a very, very, very local level. And there are a lot of curriculums that are explicitly designed to exclude talking about LGBTQ plus people, right? Not even their issues, but the people in general and the fact that they exist. And so, I think this goes back again to education is an institution, and it is a multi-layered institution that we have impact on as we become parents, right? And we send our children to school and we make choices about who we elect to our school boards that really require, again, that level of vigilance, because there have been people in the White House for a long time, for the last 4 years, certainly, who don't want to see this agenda progressed. And there are at least half of the states in this country that have worked actively to revert back to excluding these issues and these topics of discussion from schools. So I think there is a lot of work to do. I'm very hopeful, right? Because young people make me hopeful, and they've learned how to educate themselves. They don't just get information from their schools anymore. There's a lot of other places. So that to me is really good. But it'd be nice if that institution that trains young minds for 12 years or more could actually bend thoughts to being open and inclusive.
Great points made there. Thank you. I have another question, and I'm curious to hear all of your responses. So in your experience, what is the most effective way for allies to support the LGBTQIA community? And I'd like to add first, what does allyship mean to you? How would you define allyship? And I would invite anyone who'd like to begin to kick us off. It's a big question.
It's a technical question. I feel like Ryan should answer it because he's been so close to these things. What does allyship mean?
Yeah, that's a huge question. You could do a whole hour and a half just on that question. But I'll start with allyship is actionable actions taken to help a community. that's not a technical definition, I just said it. But that's truthfully what I think of it, is that you actually have to do something. You can't say you're an ally. Allyship is a verb. And I'll start there. And I think even within the LGBTQ community, I mean, we have to be better allies for each other, specifically gay men. I think that we get a lot of hype, and that we can help every other letter by helping educate and be allies for them. What was the second part of the question?
What the most effective way for allies to support the LGBTQ community as an ally?
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's one right answer to that. And I know I keep going back to it, but I think it's this education perspective. I think, you know, data and statistics drives commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but passion and stories drives investment in it. And I think that we as queer people have to be well versed in both. So that's where I'll start there. I also have another kind of anecdotal story, is that for those who aren't part of our community, you don't have to be well versed in both, but you have to know that what the right thing is in your heart. My grandpa is 80 years old, and he lives in a nursing home, and he goes to men's devotions each week. And in one particular men's devotion, the topic of LGBT rights came up. And the conversation was not great. And my grandpa didn't know all of the statistics or anything like that, but he told me this later. He said, you know, my grandson is an out gay man, and I will never stop loving him for it. Well, okay. And he stood up and left. And he called to tell me right after, and just someone speaking up in that moment, not having all the statistics or anything like that, but just doing the right thing is such an action that I will never forget that story. And he asked for a pride shirt to wear around the nursing home the next Pride. And it's just small things like that. It doesn't matter what age you are or who you are, you can do it. And you just have to speak up.
That's a great story. I love it. I love it. Grandpa with his pride shirt on, going to Bible study. Awesome.
I know.
I love it. Yeah, you know, I think that, again, allyship is something, it's a new word. And the fact that it's being spoken and referred to so often is that whole piece of changing the system. The narrative is starting to change. People understand that it is their responsibility to lift up, to give a hand up to those groups that are most marginalized. And it is a verb, and it is about action, and it is about, you know, participation. And it, we can't, you know, the famous, you know, quote, we can't be free until we're all free, right? To paraphrase. And so I think allyship is about understanding who is in your community and expanding that definition of community and bringing people up and along, and always recognizing that we can do better for others, right? That, you know, there's this great organization that my wife is part of. It's called the Othering and Belonging Institute. How specific is that, right? And it is about the belonging piece of that and figuring out how we can help other people, you know, belong. So.
Thanks so much for that. Brent, did you want to add anything?
You know, the only piece that I would add is, to me, one of the things that makes an ally is what they do when you're not present. And so like what I liked about Ryan's story is Ryan wasn't there when this happened, and yet his grandfather still really spoke up. And I think one of the pieces to me of allyship is I'm happy to be my own voice, but when I'm not there, are other people, are my allies, and this is what makes the difference, are they going to continue to speak up and help move the topic forward, even when I'm not there?
That's a really great point as well, is what's going on when you're not there. I would invite anyone on this panel to ask or answer this question. Perhaps you've had a similar experience. Somebody asked, I am the only openly gay employee at our company. Our company doesn't have any initiative supporting LGBTQ plus communities. They don't think it's an issue. What can I do to start the conversation or raise awareness?
Yeah, actually, I love this question. First, whoever said that, I mean, it's just brave to be open and to be, that advocate. So props to you on that. But I think it goes back to that allyship question, is that there are people who are going to fight for you, and you need to find them. And they're there. Some of the best allies we've had, in the fight for our movement have been, some of the best, fighters have been allies. So I say start there. And, some companies start employee resource groups with like one person who identifies, and then just a circle of allies, because people care. And people, whether they're out themselves at your company, they have friends who are out. They have, daughters, sons, non-binary people in their lives who are out. And they want to learn how to support them. And so if they can do that at work, that's going to be really impactful. So then there's that side of it. The other side of it is do some research about the impact of employee research groups, as well as just inclusivity kind of trainings and things like that on business outcomes. There is a business case for being more inclusive, especially around the LGBT community, and it's there and it's out there, and there's data and research on it. And so, like I said, if you can come at it from both sides saying, like, we've got the passion, we've got the people, and we've got the research to back it up, no senior leader can say no. I mean, it's just a dumb business decision to say no at that point. Create a case that they can't say no to is where I would start.
Yeah, and I would add, having, been in a work world, in my career where I wasn't out in the workplace. I was out to coworkers, but not out in the workplace. But I think a big piece of this is making sure that you bring your whole self to work, right? Regardless of whether there's a network there for you or not, you've made the choice to be open and out. And that takes a lot of guts. Good for you. But the key is to bring your whole self to work, right? So when people are talking about what they did over the weekend, you tell them what you did, right? And if it's different from what they did, they're going to learn from you. You have you are a resource group of one right now. But bringing your whole self and being able to have people form a relationship with you goes so far in terms of building an environment that makes you feel good and inclusive, and will make them understand the value of having that piece of diversity in their group. So.
I'm not sure if I have anything to add to what Ryan and Vicky said. I think those were some really good ideas.
Awesome, good to hear. There's another question here that sort of is similar to the one I just asked, but if and when you have encountered adversity or unwelcoming environments at work, or even in a classroom environment or in another life environment in general, what has helped you persevere, and where or who have you turned to for support and or motivation in those instances?
I could talk a little bit about that. You know, it's funny. I kind of worked in the world of you weren't out at work to once I made the choice to be out at work, I have to say I really didn't care about anybody else. In terms of I had built a peer group, I had built those relationships. There wasn't a formal resource group, but I had my coworkers and colleagues who had confidence in me. And I came out to my boss for the first time. It was the first time where I came out to somebody who I reported to, right? Which is a big risk, right? This is back in, I guess, 1999 or some time back then. And he was a great guy. And it just went back to that. I felt I really had to bring my whole self to work. And because I could have kept going and kept going and kept going and it would have been just fine. But it just started to bother me. And I liked this guy and he was a mentor to me and he was helping me. And I felt like I was being deceitful, right? And not being honest and open. And when I sat down and I told him that I was gay, he looked at me and he said, you know, he's like, that takes so much courage. And I was just like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, everything in this world is telling you you should be something else. And you made the choice that was right for you. And he said, that takes a tremendous amount of courage. And from that point on, I was like, this is the way I want to feel at work. I want to feel validated all the way through. And that was it, you know, and from that point on, and maybe I didn't say anything when I was with a client, but eventually I did. And if people made comments and those unconscious biases that happen and the little side comments of discrimination, you got to say something and do something, because having that validation of being able to bring your whole self to work and is immeasurable in terms of your confidence and your progress as a person and your ability to grow and become a good leader.
I have also found, thankfully, I've only had a couple experiences where I have felt that coworkers haven't been fully accepting or welcoming of me and who I am. And in those conversations, I've always sought to help understand their perspective. And not that I have to accept their perspective, but I ask questions about, well, why do you believe that? Or, you know, in a recent, not recent example, but my most recent example, I asked, there were some, without getting too much into the weeds, there were some microaggressions that I felt needed to be addressed. And so I spoke to that person one-on-one afterwards. And I made it a point to say, this is what I heard. Am I understanding you correctly? And then when I confirmed that my understanding was correct, then I sought to provide my impression of not only how that made me feel, but how that may make others feel in the organization, whether that person knew it or not. And so I asked for not only their perception, but then I also shared my own. And I didn't come at it from a, you have to change your mind today. I came at it from a perspective of, I'm going to plant a seed and I'm going to let you think about this. But I'm also going to let you know that it's not okay with me that you said this. But I think it's difficult to go in a conversation thinking that I'm going to change this person's mind in that moment in the conversation. And so I haven't tried to do that. Instead, I've gotten just to get them to encourage them and invite them to think differently about it and make it clear that they crossed a line.
Yeah, you know, I don't have too many stories, but I have one that really sits with me and one that I think about a lot. And it actually happened at a recruiting event back in school. It was at a networking event, and there was a group of us standing with a recruiter from a bank, not US Bank, I won't say which one, a smaller bank than US Bank. And the recruiter went around and asked people, to give them their kind of elevator pitch. And, I dress like I want to dress. I have quite a few piercings. I have a higher pitch voice, and I have this, I look amazing, this floral shirt I have. So I wear it to like every networking event. And so like, I kind of looked like a rainbow flag a little bit. And she went around this circle, and when it got to me, she said, you look more like an agency marketing kind of guy to me. And then didn't have me say my elevator pitch. And I don't know if that, was because of how I dressed. I don't know, but it seemed pretty much like it. And I didn't say anything at the time. I was a student and it was a recruiter, and I didn't want to mess up my chances. And she didn't think that I was fit for a bank. Well, I work at the 5th largest bank now. So let's see how you did. But I will say is that interaction made me realize that the banking industry needs a lot of help. They need a lot of help. And so I don't want to use the word infiltrate, but I'm not going to not use it. And, change a culture that's steeped in something like that, where you can't even look at me and want me in your business. And I'm going to change it so that everyone feels welcomed. And that's really what's brought me to being a DEI person in the financial industry. So it was a really pivotal moment for me, but something I will definitely never forget.
I love it. I appreciate all those responses. I'm looking at the time. I just want to be mindful of everyone's time here. So I'm going to cap it at 2 more questions. My apologies to anyone whose questions I don't reach today. But the second to last one I have for you is, do you think queer networks differ from other kinds of social networks or work networks? How has your network of queer friends and coworkers impacted and been impacted by your career, if at all?
I would say absolutely it's different. Being queer is not something that's passed down, it's something we have to find our community, and we've got to search for it. And so there's nothing more, I would say, empowering than finding a group of individuals with a common experience that you have, especially something that's very challenging like being queer, especially in the workplace. And so some of the most amazing people I've found have been, queer mentors for me. Actually, in my current role, my boss is a lesbian, and I met her through Compass. When I was the executive director, she was doing a panel, and we co-sponsored it, and we just started having coffee meetings. And she had worked at the bank. She worked in LGBT strategy, and so I was so intrigued and created this mentorship that was invaluable to me, because she had so many experiences that I wouldn't have known what to do, but she could help guide me through it. And so now getting to work for her has been amazing. And she's just opened the doors to so many other different people that I would never have met. And, we're in every industry, we're in every job, we're in every role. And the more connections you can have with those people, the better your life is going to be, because you have those shared experiences. Yeah, it's a great network to have.
Yeah, I would add that networks in general that are, you need to find a place that you can bring your whole self to. It really, that is the name of the game, right? And so, I have a number of peer networks that I'm part of. A lot of them are women-based, women, corporate executives, women presidents, and women in leadership and corporate boards, and the questions that get asked in that group, in these groups, are so different from a peer advisory group of mixed gender, or especially a male-dominated one. I mean, in the end, all of our, like when somebody comes in with a problem, the first question they ask is, what are you afraid of? That question, it's a great question, because women are willing to look at that. You ask that question and with a bunch of guys, they would say, what do you mean, what am I afraid of? I'm not afraid of anything, right? It's like, so, you know, you just need to find that group, right? And if it's an LGBTQ plus group, it's a women's group, if it's a transgender group, where you feel you can bring your whole self to the party, and the language and the narratives and the common experiences you can learn from it, and you can help others learn. And I think it needs to be bi-directional, right? Just don't go someplace where you think you're going to get something out of it. The most rewarding, you know, the most rewarding is where there's a give-get.
Yeah, to me, the biggest, well, first of all, I do think there's some similarities. So like employee resource groups, regardless of focus, provide networking, they provide support, they provide social atmosphere. So that piece aside, which I think is similar, what I like about queer-focused resource groups is that it speaks very uniquely to me. And I find it much more thought-provoking, and I'm much more interested in those topics. So I find it personally more rewarding to be involved in an organization that is very focused on some piece that is very core to to me as an individual. And so to me, that's the biggest difference.
Awesome. Appreciate those responses as well. I'd like to wrap things up here by bringing up this question directed more towards those who haven't come out yet. So going into the holidays, do you have any words of wisdom for our closeted friends in the audience who are either seeking new jobs in the future in recruiting season, or maybe going home to some family or friends who don't fully understand and support them yet?
I'll go with this one. Well, first of all, chances are you're not going to be in the same room with your family for Christmas, so it's something that's probably not, you don't have to worry about as much, right? Unfortunately. You know, what I would tell you is that just like anything else, this isn't something you want to blurt out over the Thanksgiving table with, you know, Uncle Ned, who you don't see, you know, you only see once a year, and you know, other people, you know, these are very intimate and personal conversations, and you want to be able to have them with your family in a way that they can ask questions and you can answer them. And so, you know, I would say there's never a time that this is easy, but certainly holidays and milestone events make us feel like it might be the right time. And, you know, if you can do it in the same room with people versus over the phone, yes, I would highly recommend not texting it to somebody, but that's just me and my generation, right? You know, I think, you know, everybody has their own sense of urgency. And there is a lot of crisis in the world today, and it makes us reflective of, are we living our lives the way we want, and are we being true to ourselves and true to our family? And so I think that, you know, it's an important point of reflection. You know, I think the other thing is to do be considerate of what everybody else is going through at the same time. There is a lot of stress everywhere, right? But, you know, you have to do what's important to you, and make it personal, and be there and be present with the people that it means the most to. And maybe you start with, you know, your twin sister who might get it before your parents do, and maybe you build your own allyship before you go in and have the big conversation. But, you know, I think this time right now, 2020 has been a year where people really look at this and say, is now the time, because life is too short and we need to live our truth, you know, be true and authentic to ourselves.
I like what Vicky said about talking to a sister first, because that's exactly what I did. Although not twin sister, I spoke to my sister first before speaking to my parents, and found that she was one of my biggest allies in that conversation. So that's what worked for me. I'm not saying that would work for everybody. But the other thing that I found really effective for my approach to it was to have as many individual conversations as possible, and not make it a big event in front of a big group. You know, I approached it slowly and thoughtfully and gave a lot of time to having individual conversations with people. And I started with those who I thought would be my biggest allies first. So that's what worked for me.
You know, this is so weird because I actually told my Uncle Ned first. Bizarre. No, I'm just kidding. I also told his sister. First, I'd like to say, you know, we talk a lot about out individuals and that being out is so important, but I just want to reiterate that anyone who isn't out, you are still as much a part of the community as anyone who is out. You are still, like, you can, you know, fly that rainbow flag underneath a sweater if you need to, but it's still yours and it's still true to you, and hold on to that because you are part of this community, whether you're out or not. And the other thing I would say is getting through the holidays. If you're out to somebody, maybe it's at school, maybe it's, you know, across the country, just because you're not with them, they're still there. And so maybe, you know, let them know that you're going home and it might be a little bit difficult, and you might need to text them and just say like, hey, I'm feeling kind of in it right now. And take that time to connect with somebody who gets you or gets that part of you. And if you don't have someone like that, then be that person for yourself. You know, set a room in your house, or, you know, something you like to do that really can be your own and can be your space where you're out for yourself. And just take control of that and control your space and just really practice that self-care. Because you deserve it, and it's so important. So that's what I would say.
Vicki, Brent, Ryan, thank you so much for your time today. It was a pleasure being able to talk with all of you in the last hour and a half. And thank you to everyone who's watching as well. Oh, you're very welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you, Maeve.
For everybody who is watching, if you'd like to get more involved within Compass, feel free to look us up on Facebook and give us a like. Otherwise, shameless plug, our Instagram is at Compass UG for undergrad. Come for any future networking opportunities. Stay for an awesome community of queer friends and allies who would love to be connected with you. And yeah, I hope you all have a lovely day. And thank you again to the panelists for such a great event today.
Thank you, guys. It was really fun.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank
Have
you
a
all
good
so
one.
much.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Have a lovely day, everyone.